So the hardcore challenge has really been gaining a lot of traction recently, and it's absolutely the most fun that you can have in World of Warcraft. So as a result, I think a lot of people are looking to get into it for the first time. And I thought I'd bring this video out to hopefully help you with a few tips to avoid dying on your first few characters. It probably won't get you there, but it'll certainly help you get a few extra levels than you might normally would have on your first few attempts. So without further ado, let's dive into it with number one. Now, at number one, we actually have a rather boring technicality, but it is super important, so we'll just get this one out of the way real quick. There is a hardcore add-on, and if you are looking to get yourself verified, you are going to need to have this add-on installed. But that is something I'd recommend anyway, because not only will it mean that you don't invalidate your character before you even begin, but it does also have a lot of interesting features, such as a list of the rules, or the level caps for doing various dungeons and things like that. It also helps track your progress and let you see what levels you attained on your hardcore characters in what time frame, so that when you inevitably die and you go again, you get to see whether you have improved. Now at number two, I'm going to suggest to you that you keep a hold of your gold as best as you possibly can. Gold is going to be really limited, especially in the early stages of the challenge. And you are going to want a few key things, such as, say, for example, your new training for your class abilities when you level up, or possibly, if you're unlucky, buying some of the bags from the vendors. These sorts of things are going to be relatively expensive, and you are going to be incredibly poor for the whole challenge. Even if you were the luckiest person alive and got some incredible drops, the inability to sell them for more than vendor value means that you are going to find yourself considerably more broke than you might be used to. So, when an opportunity comes up to buy something, really do ponder whether it is worth the investment. As a general rule of thumb, the vendor greens that you're able to get in limited supply are often very good and worth taking a look at, as well as investing early and getting yourself some bags so you can farm more items to vendor to get more gold in the first place. These tend to be some pretty strong investments, as do class abilities. However, when it comes to class abilities, you do not just want to spam train all when you get to your trainer, as a lot of abilities are very expensive and even more of them still are completely hopeless. If you are leveling as a boomy with zero intent of ever going into cat, you don't need to train those cat abilities. If you are a warlock, you don't need to make a firestone because nobody has ever needed a firestone ever, and these abilities are going to cost you a lot of gold to be able to train, so do keep an eye on where you are putting your gold. Next up, we're going to talk about complacency and overconfidence. These are the biggest killers by a long chalk in the hardcore challenge. Now, complacency I completely understand, and it is unavoidable to an extent. WoW takes a long time to level up with, and you are going to find your mind wandering at times, but it only takes a second for that really to go sideways. Now, the amount of people that you see on the hardcore popular servers that are corpses in the elevator in Undercity because they were trying to jump the gun, or the amount of people who simply just weren't expecting a mob to be particularly difficult because it's 3 levels below them, not paying attention, and then they backpedal into another mob and die is absolutely unreal. If you ever give this challenge a go, you will get notifications when people die who are also attempting the challenge, and you will not believe the amount of them that are dying pre-level 10, when of course most players are good enough that that shouldn't really be happening. This is due to overconfidence or complacency. Now, I have very much been guilty to overconfidence. I'll be showing you a clip while I'm talking about this part here, where I'm playing as a duo with a friend of mine who I know is a good player, and we're doing something that I think is relatively easy. We're playing as a priest mage, which is a very safe combo, so we're AoE farming, and I go to get a group of mobs, not realising that a quest mob is in there that we actually needed for our quest, and not knowing that when you are in a duo and he has aggro on 2 people, he actually has a mind control, at which point he mind controls me and I start spamming smite into my duo teammate, and we were completely unprepared for that. We do actually end up killing the quest mob, as well as also not having a death ourselves, but that's because we were quick thinking and relatively lucky. We stayed calm and not panic, which is something we might touch on a bit later, and that really helped us out. But it would of course have been much better if we could have avoided that situation in the first place. Next up, we're going to talk about understanding game mechanics, be this class mechanics for the class that you are playing, or the actual game mechanics of how things function when you are playing the game itself. Now, when it comes to class mechanics, a lot of people seem to think that they have a pretty good grasp on things, and most people do, but there is generally a lot more that your class can offer than what people think, And as a result, this is actually a pretty great way of learning, because if you were to play the game in a quote-unquote normal manner, you'd do what everyone else does. You'd read a guide and you'd be able to just emulate what someone else has told you to do without ever really gaining much understanding for what you're doing. This is not true with the HardCore challenge. If you attempt to use a maximum DPS talent spec that you saw online, you're not going to have the survivability talents you need to make it to 60. If you attempt to get through without training your utility spells that provide you additional functionality, you're probably not going to make it to 60. It's an entirely different way of playing the game, and something that will force you into learning a little bit more about how your class works, which will make you a better player in the long run as well. So do not think that because you died early this is a bad thing. You can go again, and when you do, you should have that little bit of knowledge for next time. Now, one thing that I would say is really helpful in this regard is understanding the actual quests around you as well. Most people's leveling is going to come from the quest completion experience, and that is something where you are going to want to know where the particularly difficult quests are. Now, beyond this, of course, I've already touched on the quest that me and my friend did, which is going to lead to needing to know more about the mechanics of how particular quest mobs work. But there is also simply just quests that are probably best avoided or attempted at a higher level than the game suggests. One particularly good example that springs to mind is Skull Rock for the Horde for their pre-quests for RFC. The amount of corpses that are in that cave from people doing this quest is absolutely unreal. I have personally seen on one attempt through there 15 corpses at one time of people that have got themselves up to roughly the level 10 mark and attempted that quest, only to find themselves getting absolutely blasted. And this is where the mindset helps as well. If you've been following the tips up to this point, you'd be thinking to yourself, well, I can do this with my class that might make that quest easier. Fantastic. Or you might think, oh, well, maybe I'll go in and I'll do the quest for RFC that requires that I kill some of the smaller mobs, but I'll do it near the door. I won't venture that in. I won't find the particularly tricky mob that's at the back that gives the extra quest, because it's not worth dying. Things like that are what your mindset needs to be at if you wish to be able to complete this challenge successfully. But obviously, if it's going to be fun for you, give it a go. What's the worst that happens? You go again. Now, there are hundreds of things that I could bring up in this video, but the one that I'm going to leave you with is going to be when you're making your character, you do want to consider what class and what race you're actually going to play, because this can make a huge difference in the HardCore challenge. So, firstly, when you're thinking about races, we all are able to look at the guides and figure out which ones have the best capacity for DPS when you get to level 60, but you may want to think about getting to level 60 in the first place. So, while a lot of people often consider Gnome to be a terrible race and don't want to play it, that escape artist ability when it comes to not dying, if you're getting yourself trapped and wailed on by mobs, becomes infinitely more valuable. Similarly, if you're wanting to improve your quality of life while you are questing and make things a little bit easier on yourself, a lot of people struggle when they're playing rogues or warriors for their inability to heal themselves, so Cannibalize is actually fantastic, as well as getting, of course, Will of the Forsaken for avoiding some of those CCs that could get you killed while you are going through your leveling process. But race really isn't as big of a factor as the difficulty in doing this challenge based on your class. There is absolutely no doubt that there are some classes that are much better at doing this than others, and while there is a big debate as to which ones are the easiest and which ones are the hardest, it's not really debatable what is first place and last place. So if you are looking to take part in this challenge and you really want an easy time of it, you're just wanting to get to level 60, you don't want to be that guy who dies thousands of times before he even gets out of the Barrens, then you may want to consider going Hunter. It is absolutely the easiest choice, and that is fairly inarguable. I don't think many people would ever disagree with that. Similarly, on the other end of the spectrum, you have Warrior. Warrior is absolutely the most difficult because it is so gear dependent. It has little capacity to get that gear with the rules of the challenge. It also has very little in the way of utility when it comes to solo survivability, and it's pretty much 2 misses in a row and you die. This is a relatively big problem, of course, and something that might put a lot of people off from taking part on the Warrior, but just so you know from my personal experience, it is far the most fun, so do bear that in mind. As for all the other classes, there is some variability and argument to be had between where they all place in terms of a tier list ranking, but what I would say is that what you're really looking for is some comfortable capacity to play your class already, unless of course you're wanting to learn something new. You are looking for something that has great capacity in fights, that is consistent. You aren't looking for anything that is particularly spiky in its nature. You don't want to be having something that's got a big chance for failure. You are, of course, as well probably going to want a character that has a lot of utility. So things like a shaman with all of its totems for every situation, or just Ghost Wolf to get out of there when things go wrong, is going to have a much easier time than the warrior will. But that's going to about wrap it up for today's video, guys. I do hope that you enjoyed, and I really hope that you get a chance to take part in the Hardcore Challenge. It is, in my opinion, the absolute best way right now to play WoW. It is an awful lot of fun, and I hope to see you in game. Laters.